Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football, and welcome back to another edition of Sunday School. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. I want to get into coverage. Well, one of my favorite subjects to talk about as a card-carrying member of DBU. I want to talk about the coverage and where the coverage is going to go now with Muschamp as the defensive coordinator now calling the shots and bringing back in Blake Gideon into the fold and what the coverage might look like for Texas in 2026. If we got a little time, we'll also look at ball hawk rate, one of my favorite stats about which one of these Texas DBs make the most plays on the football. Essentially, we'll give you the formula and all of that. This episode of Sunday School brought to you by our friends at Duck Camp. We appreciate them very much. We'll give you another message about Duck Camp coming up a little bit later on in this episode. But let's talk about coverage because, one of the reasons that, PK was obviously given his walking papers and relieved of his duties as the defensive coordinator of Texas. We know it's because Texas wasn't successfully matching or coordinating their coverages, marrying the coverages with the front successfully. And that's something that Will Muschamp, being a guy that knows a lot more about coverage because of his time as a safety and coaching in the secondary, that he'll be able to marry the coverages to the fronts. And bringing Blake Gideon back into the fold, someone who really knows, Muschamp and his system and knows, what he expects, his tendencies, preferences, and coverages. There'll be a lot more synchronicity, all right, between those two. That is the assumption. But we knew that was one of PK's struggles, right, coming from Washington and losing Jimmy Lake, was that he was going to have to figure out, what's the best way for him and just for his philosophy, marrying those coverages with the fronts. And that's why Texas really only had 1 year in 2024 where they had a high level secondary. In terms of, Texas playing elite coverage. They hadn't really had that, that was the outlier. And every other year, it seems like PK has struggled with that. So we'll talk about the coverages because, one of the things that happened with PK, he was influenced a lot by, special assistants coming in, some of the newest coaching hires for Texas, which I think is good. But ultimately, Texas never really, I would say, settled on an identity in coverage. And it may not have one with Muschamp, but I'll give you an example, right? You go look at PK when he first got here. He admitted he was playing vision, what they call vision coverage. Basically, you're playing old school, almost country coverage where you're zone coverage and you're covering an area of the field. And you're influenced by the vision that you have on the quarterback. So they call it vision. And he said they were moving to match, a lot more match coverage. Match is you basically match the man in your zone. So it's a hybrid man-zone principle. You match, you can play match with cover 3, match with cover 4, and you'll see match a lot more these days in the modern era because it's just impossible to play old school on a country coverage. There are mixes now where you'll have the safeties playing vision, and they'll be playing vision coverage, say vision quarters, but you'll be matching the receivers on the outside with the cornerbacks. So there are more variations now. Like I said, more hybrid coverages, if you will. But when he got here, he admitted in an interview that he was playing a lot of like kind of country vision coverage. And Gary Patterson came in, and that's when Texas started moving to a lot more match coverage, match cover 3, match quarters. And that's what I think really influenced PK to move toward more quarters coverage. And he really liked the match quarters. And like I said, I think a lot of that was Gary Patterson handing him the cliff notes of the Big 12 and saying, hey, dude, if you want to match up with these hybrid spread offenses in the Big 12, you want to go quarters coverage and you want to match quarters coverage. That's the best way to do it. And then that was in 2022, and Texas played like over 50% quarters coverage in 2022, most in the Big 12. That was their identity in coverage. Like that started to become their identity. And that identity shifted in 2024 officially. They were moving a little bit away from, but they still were mostly match quarters coverage in 2023. They were still top 10 in the Power 5 in their match quarters rate. I think they're around 38%. And then in 2024, the Johnny Nansen influence, which I thought also was a good influence on PK. He influenced PK to go to more single high coverages. Remember, coming from Arizona, they ran single high coverages. Your cover one, your cover three. They ran that at like 80% rate. They had single high safety coverages. And PK was running a lot of two high coverages, the quarters coverage, split coverages. So they were playing a lot of two high. And they, by the way, a lot of times your front can dictate that. Think about it. Think about your D line that you had in 2023. Like, think about that D line. You had T'Vondre Sweat, you had Byron Murphy in that mix with that D line, Vernon Broughton and young Alfred Collins in the mix. That was your D line rotation. And so I think that having that dominant D line, what did Mike McDonald, the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, recently say? If you can play with a light box and you can stop the run with a light box and play with two high deep shells, two shell safeties, I mean, that's honestly a cheat code. And he said that to him is a big reason why they were able to win the Super Bowl, because they had dominant interior D tackles, one of them being a Byron Murphy. And Texas had that. You had the best D tackle rotation arguably in college football. And you had the best light box run defense in college football. You allowed with 6 defenders in the box or fewer. A light box is basically when you have fewer defenders than they have blockers. And you had the best rush defense in the country with a light box, because I think it was 3.6 yards per rush allowed, because you had T'Vondre Sweat and you had a Byron Murphy. And those guys are either worth a player and a half or a gap and a half, because they're so dominant, so skilled, or just so massive like T'Vondre Sweat was, but also skilled at the same time. You'd go end up, if we break the numbers down, it's going to take 3 of your guys to block those 2. Hell, for some of y'all, it might take 4. It might take double teams on both of those guys just to try to neutralize them. But usually the numbers say it'll take 3 of your guys to block those 2. Then I can start flipping the numbers advantage back in my favor, which is why that extra man that I just gained, because T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy were basically a man and a half or a gap and a half. Because of that, and because I don't have to cover as many gaps, because those guys can account for essentially, 2 gaps each, or a gap and a half each. I can play with an extra guy back. One less gap to defend, or I win the numbers advantage because it's going to take 3 to block my 2. Right. And that is most rudimentary form of football. It's just a numbers game. And so with those guys, they allowed you to play with light boxes, play with 2 high shells. Easy. You lost that advantage in 2024. You still had really good D tackles, but you didn't have 4 early round draft picks at D tackle. You know what I mean? Like, that's just rare to have in your rotation. You didn't have that. So to supplement, didn't play as much 2 high shell in 2024, started playing more single high safety looks and throwing that extra guy down either into the box to help with the run game, or Texas would be able to, do some more exotic things with that extra guy that you would bring down into the box. And so you play with a lot of, and that was the first time under PK you went to single high. You went majority single high coverages, and you were at 55% single high coverages for the first time in PK's tenure in 2024. That was a Nansen influence, but also, like I said, I think personnel dictated. All right, you know what? we can't stop the run with the light box. We ain't got 4 early round. We got some good D tackles, but we don't have the best D tackle rotation in the country. We're not that deep. So let's, obviously adjust. And the adjustment was, we got to stop the run, but let's do it now by bringing an extra guy down into the box to match their numbers or to win the numbers advantage. And then, but you still play in terms of zones, in terms of coverages, you played a lot of zone. You were 117th in press coverage rate, 113th in man coverage rate in 2024. Still one of the best secondaries in the country. So there are plenty of ways to skin a cat. You don't always, you were probably 16% man coverage rate. You didn't have to play a lot of man coverage. You play a lot of match coverage, what ended up deteriorating into man coverages, but still you were able to play a lot of sticky match zone coverage with Makuba and with Jade Barron. Malik Muhammad, Taft had a great year that year. So that your identity changed from being match quarters to being more of just a single high coverage. And like I said, single high zone coverage for the most part, because you weren't playing a ton of man. And in 2025, that shifted. Right, 2025, it shifted again, and not drastically, but I think one of the things that, and I think was an improvement. I do believe Sark probably was the one that demanded this. You played more man coverage than you had played. Remember, I told you were 107, you were 113th in man coverage rate. You were less than 20% man coverage rate in 2024. Fantastic coverage, but still not a lot of aggressive man coverage. That number rose to around 27% in 2025. So you played more man coverage. And that was the real big shift for you. Still played tons of single high. All right. Your match 3 rate was one of the top 10 in the country. You played a lot of match. So you did continue to be a single high coverage team. Like that has been the identity in coverage for Texas, but they've shifted. And like I said, I think a lot of it was personnel. Some of it was the influence of with Johnny Nansen being on the staff too. So where does the coverage go now with Muschamp? I do think you're still going to get more single high coverages with Muschamp. I think you'll get more. I think you'll cover one. Actually, Texas at 28%. You were 49th, I believe, somewhere around there in FBS in man coverage rate last season, which that's a huge leap. Not enough for Sark, obviously, with PK, but that's the huge leap. And I think with the personnel that you have, a safe assumption is you're going to stay right around 28%, or you're going to increase. And if you increase, you're probably going to be approaching a third of your coverage being man coverage. That would probably put you somewhere in the top 30 in man coverage rate. Well, do I think they're going to improve or increase man coverage rate that much? 28% is a lot. Your man coverage rate technically, when I looked at it, was higher than Georgia, I believe, in 2020. Yeah, you're higher than Georgia was in 24. Man, and I always said that's why Sark is bringing in Muschamp. He's bringing in Muschamp to build the Georgia defense here in Texas. Well, like I said, you could jump to about 30%. My prediction is you're going to stay at least where you are now in man coverage rate, if not increase, because you look at the personnel. Cade Phillips, I think Texas played a little bit more man coverage when he came in, just because when you got a freshman in there, simplifies things, right? You got that cat as man coverage. I thought that's not only a strength for him, but for Texas, it probably cleaned up. Remember, they had some busted coverages and issues with guys with undisciplined eyes, and that's not something we saw. I think Texas might have simplified some things or used that opportunity. Hey, if we're going to make the move with Cade Phillips, let's play a little bit more man coverage. So I felt like toward the end of the season, so maybe that's a trend. If you look at Bo Masco coming in, Rutgers is top 20 in man coverage rate. Last season, they play a lot of man coverage. All throughout the time that Bo Masco has been there, they've been one of the highest rates of man coverage, or had one of the highest rates of man coverage in college football. Also, I think he translates to that, bringing him in. If you start looking at, I just think, how aggressive Sark wants to be, and Sark has stated they want to play more man coverage. He is influenced by Saban. Saban is on the record for saying the best coverage is man coverage. You got to have the athletes to do it. Not every school has the athletes to do it. Texas is one of those schools. Alabama was one of those schools where they can play a high rate of man coverage just because they do have the athletes to be able to keep up. That's the big matchup issue in man coverage is, what if my guy just can't match up with this dude? He's just better. He's just physically better. He's bigger. He's stronger. He's faster. Right? Period. Just my guy just gonna get whipped. That's usually your concern. But if you're recruiting at the level of Texas, Ohio State, the LSU's, and the Georgias, that should never be the case. Where your guy is severely outmatched in a man coverage situation. So my guess would be you're probably going to keep your man coverage rate somewhere close just because the athletes that you have now. And Grayson Littleton, you go let's look at real quick these guys, their numbers in man coverage. I went and broke it down. Cade Phillips man coverage last year, 40% reception rate in man coverage, 87 passer rating allowed in man coverage. They had one missed tackle in man coverage. He was really good in man coverage for you. Probably your best coverage guy, period, in man coverage. You know, like I said, Malik Muhammad now, obviously, last year, I think he was really good too in man coverage. We talked about that. The argument could be, honestly, that you should have played more man coverage. We talked about this too when Malik Muhammad was testing at the combine. If you look at the testing, right? You go look at some of the numbers for Malik Muhammad at the combine. A lot of folks are saying that there's teams that like him or teams that are going to be interested in Malik Muhammad are probably going to end up being teams that like to play man coverage. He had really long arms, 32 3/8 arms, measured out, 6 foot. But when I looked at his metrics in man coverage compared to the rest of that cornerback class coming out, I looked at just the top 24 guys in man coverage. Third best yards allowed in man coverage, per coverage snap, I should say, in man coverage in that class. His forced, if you go look at his forced incompletion rate, which is their version of a ball hawk rate, he's at 25%, 8th best in the class. And passer rating allowed in man coverage, this is career, by the way. This is over career. 6th best among that cornerback class. And I looked at the top 24 cornerbacks, but that's in man coverage. In zone coverage, different story altogether. In zone, yards allowed per coverage snap, he was actually pretty good there. I don't say it was 5th best, 7.78. Forced incompletion rate, though, in zone coverage, he dropped to 17th out of the 24 cornerbacks, and passer rating allowed in zone coverage, 14th out of those 24 cornerbacks. He should have been in man coverage too. You know who else should have been in man coverage? This is the crazy thing about it. Jalen Gibbo may never get benched if they played a lot more man coverage. His man coverage, 74 passer rating allowed in man coverage, 55% reception rate in man coverage. I looked at his zone coverage numbers for Jalen Gibbo. This is definitely part of why he got benched in zone. 80% reception rate in zone coverage, and 139 passer rating allowed in zone coverage. His forced incompletion rate dropped from 11% to 4%. With zone coverage, there's a lot of pre-snap. There's a lot of pre-snap, and you have to have very disciplined eyes, because pre-snap, I'm looking at obviously a lot of the same things, right? Down, distance, formation. I'm looking at the personnel, the situationally, my coverage, what's my leverage based on where my help is, what's the strength of the coverage, what's the weakness of the coverage. You do all that, right? Before the snap, and at least give yourself an idea of how they're trying to attack you and what they're trying to do. And then post snap, though, you have progressions in zone coverage. You have keys. I key one, I key whatever I don't know what, everybody's got different keys based on the coverage and based on the rules of the coverage. All right, let's just say your key is number 2. Well, you don't stay on number 2. You go from number 2. If number 2 goes vertical, if number 2 goes inside, then your key always switches. Your progression probably is, I go from number 2 and go immediately number 1. Some guys want to read the 3-step of the quarterback before I even get to my first key. All right, let me check that quarterback out and see what he's doing, because I don't want him. A lot of the issues with Texas in zone coverage is because a lot of guys weren't reading the 3-step. They probably were starting with their keys initially, and then the quarterbacks just get the ball out real quick. And then you're late rallying to the quick game. So a lot of guys like to read the 3-step of the quarterback, eliminate the quick game, then I'm going to my keys. I'll go from 2 to 1, back to the quarterback. That's a progression. You have disciplined eyes. Some guys get lost and eyes just start wandering. You'd be surprised how often it happens. Undisciplined eyes in zone coverage. So some guys are just better in man, because yes, you should be doing all the pre-snap work you do in zone, in man too, but not as much responsibility post-snap. I got this man. Now you should be, obviously working your technique and working your leverage based on the strength of the coverage and where your help is. But once the ball is snapped, I'm literally just in man coverage. I got this man in zone. So even if it's a matchup zone, there's a lot more of kind of intellectual analysis that is taking place and not just matching up with this dude. Just got to run side by side with this guy. And so I do think there is some simplification of everything and go a little bit more man later in the year. But like I said, Cade Phillips, Grayson Littleton was really good in man coverage too. Malik Muhammad was fantastic in man coverage. I just gave you his man coverage numbers, but hey, I'll give you the man coverage numbers for Malik Muhammad last season. 36% reception rate allowed, 44 passer rating allowed in man coverage. You can make the argument that like I said, Gilbo was better in man coverage too. That Cade Phillips was really good in man coverage. Malik Muhammad was really good in man coverage. That you probably should have played more of it last season. But anyway, getting back to it, I do think you keep that same man coverage rate, or it increases a little bit. So maybe you're at 30%. I don't think it drops. I don't think your man coverage rate. I don't think that's why Sark is bringing in Muschamp, because I also think Muschamp's going to blitz more. And that's another safe assumption. You go look at Georgia's blitz rate for Texas. Your blitz rate last year, you were around 28%. You were 24% in 24, so it increased. Blitz rate for Georgia in 24-25, you're around 35%. I think it's safe to say, I know Muschamp wasn't necessarily running the defense, but that he's going to be more aggressive. One of the aggression indicators is you're going to blitz more. And Georgia Tech, when Blake Gideon was there as the defensive coordinator, they were around 32% blitz rate. I think you're going to blitz more. You're going to look at how to use Rasheed Biles, who's going to be a weapon for you. Pittsburgh was top 15 in box blitz rate. They had the most 6-man pressures in all of college football. So, and that's just sending guys, usually linebackers, when you're sending 6 guys. So I just think blitz is going to increase. If that's the case, your cover 1 rate will probably increase, and your single high coverages will probably stay about the same. So if I'm guessing, I think your cover 1 rate stays the same. And like I said, I don't think you're going to have dominant D tackles. You're actually a little undersized at linebacker, which makes Jelani McDonald's role so pivotal. You're probably bringing him down into the box a lot to do funky stuff with Jelani McDonald, which I fully support, by the way. I want him blitzing. I want him on the edge. Put him down at linebacker depth. He's a guy you should be a spy for you a lot of the time, because you're going to be doing so much funky stuff with Jelani McDonald. I doubt very seriously he's going to be in the back end a ton as just a too high safety shell. Right. And then if you do get another safety, when you get another safety, you can trust that earns that spot opposite Jelani McDonald. To me, they'll probably likely be the one that is going to be in the post as your center fielder. I think that's what you should be looking for. Is somebody who's got some range at that safety position, so that when you are in your cover match 3 or you are in your cover 1, you got somebody that can, defend the post and defend the deep vertical shot and help the DBs out. Essentially, when I was playing, that's what we did. I mean, we kept a deep safety in the post. Most of the time, it's probably Ahmad Brooks. And we played man coverage on the outside, press man coverage on the outside. And all I knew was I got deep post help. And at the last possible minute on the deep ball on the 9, last possible second, I'm going to have a safety there at one point. I don't necessarily know where he's going to be. If he's going to be over the top. I don't know if he's coming in to just try to make contact when the ball gets there. I'm not sure if he's playing the ball. I don't know, but I know I'll get it last second, which is why I'm trying to pin that guy to the sideline as long as I can and give my safety more room. All right. Or force that quarterback to throw it way over the top and deep. But that's, if you want to play more man coverage, you got to have that guy in the post, unless you're going to be playing zero coverage. And Texas might play a little bit of that, but they'll probably be situationally in the red zone. And like I said, Jelani McDonald also, he's going to influence this. I think you're going to bring him, you're going to be doing such, elaborate, exotic things with him as a blitzer, as a spy. He's a great run support guy. So you're going to have him down the box to help your undersized linebackers potentially. So all indicators are still playing a lot of single high coverages, Playing still a lot more man coverage, so you'll probably be high rates of cover 3 and high rates of man coverage. Not saying you won't mix in some quarters in there, all right, because you'll be very. But I think if you're looking at the identity, what's going to be your identity coverages, I think you're going to be in. I think you're going to be in a lot of man coverage. I think you're probably going to be in a lot of cover 3, match 3. If I had to guess, now, obviously that's what this is. Just trying to predict. And I think, like I said, I think your personnel kind of fits you playing more man. I think you'll play more press man. I do. I think you'll play more press man coverage too when it comes down to it. All right. So that's just say kind of a preview at what kind of coverage I think Texas will be trying to utilize in 2026. Real quick, let's get to ball hawk rate, then we'll get out of here. All right. So ball hawk rate, simple. It's a simple formula. Basically, we're going to take PBUs and interceptions and divide it by targets. Now, I'll throw out there Pro Football Focus, which I like. They do have a ball hawk rate, but it's a little different. They have a forced incompletion rate, but they have their own formula, and it doesn't necessarily add up, and it's not really simple. So this was going to be simple for you. Cade Phillips is your number one ball hawk on the team. He's at 27%, got 6 PBUs, 22 targets, 27%. That's a hell of a ball hawk rate. I went and looked at some of the DBs coming out. Mansour Delane, who's the top corner coming out, he's at 37%. Dude's a freak. You go look at Avian Terrell, he's like at 13%. D'Angelo Pons, the cornerback out of Indiana, he's at 21.6%. So 10% is probably average, 15% is probably good, 20% is really good, like excellent. Then anything over that, you're talking about elite, crazy stuff. And Cade Phillips is in that category in terms of somebody who makes plays on the ball. Rasheem Biles, I just threw him in there because I wanted to see. I was curious. He's at 24%, so he'd be second among the defenders on your team right now. Also, somebody who's really high up there, Jelani McDonald. He's at 15% ball hawk rate. Gotta love that. Grayson Littleton, big fan of Grayson Littleton. I think Grayson Littleton, you go look at overall, I mean, he ends up cracking. We talked about like pressure rate and havoc rate and run stop rate. Went over all these different. I mean, Grayson Littleton always creeps into the conversation there. He's at 12.6%. If you want to know his ball hawk rate. Xavier Fields to me is actually pretty high. He's at 16%, which is pretty good. Very small sample size, but he's at 16%. Shout out to Rowan Roberson. He's at 15%. Rowan Roberson, the metrics love Rowan Roberson. I know the eye test, people still thinking about him as a special teams player, but the guy makes plays, and like the metrics love him. The data loves him. Jordan Johnson-Rubel, he's over 20% on here on the ball hawk rate. Very small sample size, but still just giving him his props here. And another guy went and looked at Bo Masco. I went and looked at him too. He's at 11%. If you look at just straight up ball hawk rate. So no matter who you're looking at, Derek Williams Jr. is at 0%. Kobe Black's at 6% ball hawk rate. It's need him to make more plays on the ball. And I think another guy I was looking at, John McDonald, I think I said him, he's at 15%. So my big rule with DBs are, I need you to make as many plays as you give up. So we're going to be keeping up with ball hawk rate with these guys. Because everybody gets beat. It's okay if you get beat. But the problem with Texas secondary last season, until they made the move to Cade Phillips, was they weren't making enough plays on the ball. So that young man's attitude and his mentality kind of totally changed the trajectory of that secondary last year. Let's see if he can continue to do so. All right. Thank to our friends over at Duck Camp real quick before we move on. Duck Camp makes gear for folks who live for being out there, whether that's in a duck blind at sunrise or on the 40 acres for a Saturday kickoff. Born right here in Austin, Duck Camp builds best in-class hunting and fishing apparel that works just as well for a full day in the field as it does for a long day of tailgating. From sun protection shirts that keep you cool during those early season scorchers to their iconic game series hats that feel like instant classics, Duck Camp gear is ready for football season, hunting season, and every season in between. Get out there, stay out there, and hook 'em horn. Shop Duck Camp at duckcamp.com. Thank you to duckcamp.com, and thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for twisting and tweaking the dials. Thanks to each and every one of you for out there for watching and for listening. For Matthew, I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Ravens. For our friends over at Duck Camp as well. Until next time, hook 'em horns.